being discussed. And the trade union response, obviously has been about precariousness of work and insecurity in their contracts and so on. But I think the thing that makes that significant now is the fact that without the act, without the technological act, without the technology to link seller of service or producer with customer and not have an employment contract to do that, it's actually embedded in the technology. And I read something the other day that said that after the financial crisis, employers had invested, there's only 2% increase in labour costs, but something like, I can't remember, 250% increase in investment in technology. And it is the technology that is being used as a direct attack on living standards and workers and things. And I think the fact that Swasti understood the centrality of technology, I think a lot more than other people. The two pieces of work I did with her in the 90s, I mean, in the book about technology, I did some work on data entry, which was what the current level of technology allowed, that you could take, there was a lot of transferring paper records onto machine-readable records, mainly in the Caribbean, but also elsewhere. And then there are all kinds of issues and health and safety issues to do with industrial injuries and things, and I think that's the piece that I did in that book. But I also did a project with Swasti for the ILO on women and gender and software development. And I think the other strength, of Swasti's work was that she looked at the upskill as well as the downskill of that technological change. And as she says in the film, yes, some women do relatively well compared to other women. I mean, it didn't go into compared to men at the same level. But also it does threaten the whole kind of basis of work. And I think, in some of the disputes that Dan and I had with Guy Standing about flexibilization or feminization of labour, where he understood feminization of being more women in the labour force, whereas we understood it as being reducing, all kind of labour relations issues to the conditions that women have faced outside the mainstream labour market, essentially. So there's a lot of issues that I think come from the kind of issues that are raised in the film and raised in Bettina's talk. Marnie, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just to add, as you said, to put things into a wider conversation. One of the things that Annika said in introducing the film, which I think we were all very, very pleased to see, and that's a wonderful thing that's preserved for all of us, is how prescient it seems in many ways. Bearing in mind it was filmed nearly 20 years ago. It struck me that one factor that has changed significantly in those 20 years is the changing role of China in the global economy, and the way in which the universal issues we've talked about are also refracted through a politically quite specific set of alternatives, almost providing an alternative sort of laboratory of alternative-related employment practices. And again, hearing Ruth talk about Uber and related internet-based, very non-unionized and non-traditional capitalist sorts of organizations is also something where China has really been at the forefront. I think it is no coincidence at all. It's certainly a coincidence that firms like Alibaba.com, which are now very much at the front line of this sort of changing technology, or indeed Deliveroo, which you mentioned, which actually of course is founded by a Chinese and a strong Chinese investment in it, are part of this movement. And I think the question that throws up, particularly again in this politically very traumatic week, and actually in a year when there has been all across Europe, not just in Britain but elsewhere, a huge amount of debate about the question of balance in terms of questions of employment rights, who gets what from the economy, is the following. In 1997, it was still possible to say that there was a dominant, broadly, in quote marks, liberal, but neoliberal, but also in some ways social democratic liberal framework of expectations. The trajectory was towards greater popular participation in politics, broadly pluralist democratic rights, which included workers' rights. Organisations like the EU became very much at the forefront of that, which is why they were so unpopular with the then Conservative government in Britain at the time. And the faults and the deficiencies that Swasti spoke about, and that everyone here works on were very much linked to flaws in that particular model which needed to be addressed. What the Chinese example shows, and what it shows much more strongly today than it did 20 years ago, is that alternative models are being proposed, many parts of which are very uncomfortable. If one looks at the question of Foxconn workers, for instance, many of whom, most of whom are women, in fact.
Maybe
The question,
60%.
sorry? What's it?
60-40, that's the rate.
60-40 women to
Yeah.
yeah, 60-40. So thank you again for the facts there. But again, very much so. And if you look at the work actually of my former colleague in Oxford, Jenny Chan, who's just gone to the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, whose new book, I think, has managed to get past the lawyers. So I should be careful since we're recording. But rightly so, I think it's now called Dying for a Smartphone, on the grounds that mentioning a brand name of smartphone in the title might be problematic. So there's a generic title talking about the very strong links between increasingly exploitative employment practices in China and the production of the Mac. I think Firenze mentioned the Mac. Here we talk about various brands of smartphones, no brand names, no crisis. So I think the question of an alternative political model, which is very restrictive of traditional liberal political rights, which explicitly shows no intention of moving towards that kind of more pluralist social democracy, but rather celebrates its authoritarianism and argues that this provides an alternative state party-driven framework for a different type of worker protection. And yet the reality also of a growing, although sluggishly growing economy, in which employment chances for women have changed very significantly in the last 20 years, partly because also of urbanisation, I think throws up a very interesting set of contrasting political questions that are different from 1997, but which I think draw inexorably from the questions that we saw in the video.
Thank you. I mean, that reminds me of another little anecdote, if I can just close it. When I was in hiring, when was it? 1995, and Swasti was actually living in a kind of place, but she was a UN person and quite important. And a lot of us were housed. Was there anyone else here who was there? You were there. Do you remember we had these, they evicted these workers from these kind of unfinished concrete apartment blocks, remember? We all had to get bicycles, remember? And it rained all the time. Anyway, but one of the things that I remember, we had to buy these bicycles. We couldn't hire them because there wasn't a market. So we had to buy them, and the deal was we would sell them right at the end.
Market economy.
Yeah, and market economy. And they'd set up this night market thing, like a night market where you could buy souvenirs and things. And on the day before I was going to leave, and I talked to somebody, a woman who was selling something, I can't remember what, that I would sell her my bicycle at the end. So I went to see this woman to do this transaction. And the police appeared. Now, the police were actually very scared, apparently, of women in the, and I was told, I have no evidence of this, that they'd all been issued with cloaks. But if these terrible Western feminist women kind of behaved as one expected them to do, and took all their clothes off, then they could whip out these clothes. Social decency with the stores, and actually there was a time, come to think of it, when Hillary Clinton came to talk, and there was, police barricades, and you had to queue up, and it was pouring with rain, and everybody was, and she came, she had this huge entourage so that there couldn't be, many people in the hall, and we were all outside. And I remember Anne-Marie Gertz, actually, it was, standing there shouting, "If you don't let us in, we'll take our clothes off." I didn't know if that was a threat or a promise. But the point was that there was a lot of social control. But even 20 years ago, when I was negotiating with this woman that she would buy a bicycle, the police came and said, said to her, "You're not allowed to buy anything. You're not allowed to, do this transaction." And I said to the police, "It's all right, she's not buying, I'm selling." Now, they had a very limited vocabulary, so we got away with it. But you could feel this kind of urbanization of women kind of sorting things out that I think has, translated over the generations. And, you can see internationally that actually the price of women's labor in China, or of, let's say, assembly labor, enable fingered labour, has gone up, and it's not the lowest. It's, Cambodia is even lower now.
Cambodia is much lower, yes.
Yeah, and it's gone up, and partly it's gone up because, you know, women have got more militant, and there has been more militant about, you know, the social wage in urban countries. And so the struggle over what I call the reproductive bargain, that generationally it's changed, it's not static, but I do think you're right that the kind of issues that Swasti was talking about and the way production and work responded, it was nascent in China then, and we are still seeing it playing out. What was the name of that book? Dying for a...
I think it's now called Dying for a Smartphone,
and
it's by Jenny Chan.
Anyway, thank you very much. Okay, so shall we move on? Session 2 is now going to be Sheila Rowbottom and Carol Volkowitz, in whatever order you like. And I'm going to ask Alison to share this next.
Do you well, chronologically, I don't know how we should do it.
Is that right?
Yes. And no, it's me. I think you should go first.
Carol, I think she's sorted that. It's going to be beautiful.
Ruth, I think if Sheila goes first.
What?
If Sheila goes first, it would be better.
Okay, Sheila. Okay, thank you. Right.
I was able to be here for this occasion, which I think is both sad as we mourn the loss of Swasti, but also celebratory as we recall the kind of work that she has done and the impact that it's had in the world. And so in the opening session, we talked more about, quite a lot about the issues of technology. Swasti's work on technology. I think in this session we're going to talk in particular about Swasti's work on home working and on her work with Sheila on dignity and daily bread. Wonderful title, I think, for a book which reminds us that it's not only about the purely material conditions of our lives, it's also about, do we get the bread by begging, or do we have some kind of dignity in the ways that we get the bread? And obviously women's organising is a key aspect of this. So let me invite Sheila to share her memories of Swasti and working with her, and I think Sheila probably needs no introduction as a feminist historian who's worked both on women's history in the UK and elsewhere, and also on contemporary struggles.
Actually, dignity and daily bread is not our phrase. It came from the women vendors in Gujarat demonstrating for the right to sell their produce, and it was captured in a video made by them with the help of a young woman who came from America, who was going around teaching women to make videos of their own struggles, and the vendors made the video. So the phrase stuck in my mind when I came to work with Swasti. I'm going to take us back in time to the 1980s. From 1983 to 86, I was working in the Greater London Council's, it was called the Popular Planning Unit, and it was a link to the Industry and Employment Committee at the GLC. we were able at the GLC, which actually had a budget rather like a small country, to fund projects to create jobs to counter the unemployment, but also to contribute to the welfare of Londoners, or some groups of Londoners. And it was in that time really when lots and lots of people came together, because we became a kind of hub for bringing together lots of people who were working on a wide range of different topics. And we would be visited by people from all kinds of countries, and at the same time the fire brigade would be practicing their band, and the gondoliers who were on strike in Italy would come. So it was like a strange citadel, which was then captured by Margaret Thatcher finally. In that time, 83 to 86, I'd heard about Swasti. I didn't meet her until just later, but I'd heard about her because I knew about the organising of homework, which we were encouraging, and also because the meeting of women working worldwide, I'd heard about you all coming to have that meeting. I was editing a newspaper with someone called John Hoyland called Jobs for a Change, in which we were publicising the kinds of things we were doing at the GLC. After the closure of the GLC in 1986, I got a strange telephone call asking me to go to work as a women's consultant at the United Nations University WIDER. That's the World Institute for Development and Economic Research. And I kept trying to tell the man on the phone I was not an economist, because I thought I can't go on false pretenses. I'm a historian and not an economist. Anyway, this person would not take no for an answer. I had no work, and I heard that I was going to be paid for this activity. And so this tended to mean that I became a little less denying that I was able to do it. And off I went, and when I arrived at WIDER, I learned that I was there because of Kumari Jayawardena, who was, as many of you know, she was married then to Lal, who was the director of the institute. And while I was there, I found the book by Swasti, Common Fate, Common Bond, and it was really important because it sort of brought together the things that I'd been actually experiencing and looking at what was happening to the economy in London, and linking that up with a global perspective of what was happening to poor women in other countries. I had a very funny time at WIDER because I arrived there and waited for Kumari, but there was a crisis in Sri Lanka and she never came. And I then applied the kinds of things that I'd learned at the GLC in this United Nations Institute. So I made contact with people who were in the unions in Finland and women's groups, and people who were the people who were interested in issues around women's work, in work like the Workers' Education kind of organisation there, and waited, and I waited and waited, and I went to I decided that what I would do would go around and ask all the economists what they were working on, like an oral historian. And actually nobody really talked to them very much about their work, and they assumed that, I mean, I was not an economist, but I did have some broad understanding. I learned from them because they were all very pleased in their little rooms to talk, so we came very much to ask them about their work. And in that time, I really made two allies. One was a development economist called Marie-Lise Swans, and another was the man who was the press officer, because he was often in despair about the fact that all this work was done and then it went into papers and it was was put in his place. There were, you know, loads and loads of papers by economists who came, but there was no way of getting that stuff out. So I applied myself to reading these things and thinking of ways with which they could be got out, because that's what I'd done at the GLC. So while I was doing that and reading Swasti, I was also involved with an attempt to, one of the many attempts I've been involved in life, to create a non-aligned socialist movement. And I organised at the Chesterfield Socialist Movement Conference, and I think it's 1987, a workshop, and I invited Swasti. And I was desperately trying to find the dates for this and looked through my old diaries. And I think that it's in 87, but it could have been in 88, and this is driving me crazy actually. But I will eventually find out when this was, and there may be people who know here. But Swasti, I contacted Swasti, and she came to that workshop, and I also brought along people from Women Against Pit Closures, including Anne Scargill. And I remember that Gita Sagal came and spoke about the women's role in organising around Bhopal, and so it was a workshop really about movements around women and livelihood, but we didn't quite have that word yet. And my first impression of Swasti was of this immensely warm beam that she gave me. And from that time, we just hit it off, and we started working together. I was going to visit her often in Brighton. It was always incredibly pleasant because there was such a welcome always, and incredibly nice food. It was always great joy working with her, actually. We started work on a proposal in 88, and we were trying to get together a kind of little conference on women who were working in low-paid jobs and who were in what we would now say precarious kind of work. We had a lot of problems about the word, about whether to call it casualised or not. But we did organise that, and it was that produced the book Dignity and Daily Bread. And Kumari did eventually arrive at Wider, although not before I'd gone down to the library, saying to the librarian that as this institute was going to develop work on women, it would be good to have some books about women. And this very serious Finnish man said to me, "But this is an economics institute." I tried to explain. At the same time, I'd come across Jane Tate and the organising in Britain of home workers, because I went to a meeting that was organised by the TUC in Yorkshire, and we had a discussion in Sheffield about women's low pay, and Jane Tate came with home workers who'd begun to organise near Halifax. And in that time, I thought, this is terrible, this is not, the home workers need time to be able to discuss. So I offered to take the children off, and I took a little posse of home workers' children off. But I wasn't really used to looking after, all different ages. Anyway, I decided we'd go for a treat, so we went to this kind of centre and bought nice ice cream and things. But there was a baby who was just toddling, and this baby was being looked after by one of the old girls, and it sort of escaped. And the next thing I knew, the baby is headed into the water was shallow because there was a fountain, and this fountain was going off, and the baby was headed and was fished out, fortunately, by somebody who was near. But I felt terrible because then I had a wet baby. had given us, and then I took it back with a lot of apologies and explanation. Though my role in the discussion was not very noticeable, but I got an invitation from Holland to go to a conference, and I thought, well, it would be much better for the home workers and Jane Tate, who are actually organising, to go. So instead of me going, they went. So there was the home workers from Staley Bridge, and so that at least that brought those early links together. Eventually, at Wider, I was going backwards and forwards, we did manage to produce Dignity in Daily Bread. But it took quite a long time. It didn't come out until the early 90s. And I was pretty ignorant but dogged. And Swasti was, as people have said, very diplomatic and good at sort of sailing through obstacles.
Yes.
But there were obstacles, but we never knew what they were, because although it was a small institute, it operated with a sort of Byzantine complexity, which I used to spend ages trying to work out what was going on. And most I never really did understand. But I think one of the problems was that we weren't just talking about women, we were also trying to bring in people who were organisers, women who've been connected to organising in, for example, free trade zones. And at that time it was seen as not very hegemonic or not the right kind of people for an institute that wanted to have high academic status. So we were rather doing two things at the same time, and I suspect that Kumari knew that this was problematic, trying to do more than one thing at a time. But I didn't. My whole inclination was that you shouldn't just sort of call in women whose names were known, but to have women who actually had practical experience of organising. And that was how the book came about. I wanted to just end with the words of Tom Paine that Swasti identified with. My country is the world, and my religion is to do good. And say that her aim was to ensure room for womankind in this democratic vision, with its openness to people of all nations and of many faiths, not forgetting the skeptics who have none. And that is surely also really relevant for the predicament that we're in now, although painfully difficult.
Thank you, Sheila, for sharing those memories about how you and Swasti sort of negotiated within and struggled within this institution that thought it was a rather strange idea that you would actually, you were doing a book on women organising, and you actually wanted to bring women organisers to the conference. I hope they've moved on a little bit since then.
And I learned a lot, because it was also when issues of fundamentalism and the impact on women were being raised, both from women in South Asia and also in North Africa.
Does anybody want to give an immediate kind of contribution or question on the experiences that Sheila's talked about?
I think it's probably appropriate for me to speak now, because I'm Diane, you can contribute, I'm sure, as much as I can, because I'm actually chair of a Manchester-based NGO, women's NGO called Women Working Worldwide, which has been mentioned. And I first met Swasti in one of Monica's network meetings in Europe, and in a way, I think Swasti's approach was Women Working Worldwide tried to embody that, because we both did research or had academic colleagues who did the research, but we also tried to link that to organising in action. As our big thing is actually listening to the women themselves, what their needs are, what's happening to them. And I think that process of those global networks, the upside, if you like, is those connections that Swasti saw, I think, very clearly. we try to embody in our activism and our research very strongly. And listening to Swasti speaking and that warmth and that engagement combined with that incisive perspective was very much something I think that shaped the way that we still work now. We're still going only just, like many small NGOs. But I think she had a profound influence on the way that women working worldwide grew and consolidated, and has really continued to look at the ways in which women's work is changing and evolving, and in some ways not changing at all in terms of where women sit in those kind of power hierarchies, at the bottom. So we've worked on homeworking with homeworkers worldwide, on looking at first generation women workers currently in the horticultural sector in Africa, but also trying to be, as Swasti was, aware of what the trends are and where things are going. So not second guessing, but trying to be aware of these bigger global changes and how they impact along the global supply chains. And we're still very much, I think, there today. My only regret is that we're struggling at the moment when we're working like many small NGOs, but we advertised last year for some new trustees, and we've got some amazing younger women. We were absolutely delighted with the response, all defining themselves as feminists, all with an internationalist perspective, which was great. My only regret is they couldn't listen to someone like Swasti and get that kind of perspective. They're kind of moving towards it, and so I really will get them to listen to, when it goes on YouTube, that video of her talking. So, struggles, we're still struggling, but we're still working around those different kinds of organising strategies that we need to adopt.
Yeah, but also, actually, why got through your work a better status in our way of working. But I think the value of Swasti was that she wanted to bridge between the academic world and the activist world. And she gave credibility to the work of the activists, because she was, a known activist, a known academic. She had his publication, she had a position, and she used that position every time to bridge. And she, it's unfortunate that some, they call themselves sisters of the trade unions, are not here. But the fact that she did publish in the ILO and in the International Trade Union, and that they gave her space, was that there was this whole group of women who wanted to change the position of women workers, who need actually an activist as Swasti to give it words and to give it credibility. And that is really the bridge she always was looking for. And we were, we were very happy to receive her, because she was an excellent speaker, and she could convince men. She could convince an audience which was anti-women workers or anti-feminism or whatever you call them, and she, because with her facts and figures and new technology and all those hot topics, suddenly a topic of nonsense seen as homework or informal sector got status. And that was a real change. I don't know how many academics I had on my desk which were never being able to talk about homework before, but the whole topic got status. And she was one of the ones who supported that.
And she could address different audiences.
Yeah.
Because it had a meeting that brought together women, organisers and academics. So you didn't have any fear that they would listen, she would respect them, and there would be that two-way dialogue.
And she brought it to other audiences. That was important.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something, because Jane's very happy here today. And as you say, she was one of the people who's involved in organising homeworking both in the UK and internationally. And I was on the board of trustees of Homeworkers Worldwide, which is the kind of international kind of organisation that is in touch with home working groups all around the world. And I think one of the things that came out of that wider project and the book was the taking seriously, not just in academia and trade unions, but also in terms of international development organizations, the issue of home working. And in 1996, the HomeNet network pushed through the ILO Convention on the Home Workers, which was a very important milestone. And in terms of the UN system, it got on the map. It wasn't straightforward after that. And in 2000, in these halcyon days, when we had a Department of International Development that actually cared about development and international women, funded a big international mapping project to look at organising of home workers in different countries. Now, Jane did send some photographs of home workers around the world that I could show, perhaps, in the tea break. But I think that for all kinds of reasons, including some of the things that Jens raised this morning, this issue about who's a worker and what being a worker means and what the kind of relationship is between work and other parts of life is, a very current problem, and one that is, keeps recurring in different kind of aspects. And I was involved in some ESRC funded project with the TUC some years ago, and we were talking about, women's work in different kind of contexts, and even the then equality officer of the TUC said we can't have any organisations talking who aren't trade unions. And this whole kind of battle about who was entitled to organise women workers, whether it had to be something called trade union, even though we know the kind of that's a very problematic concept in a lot of contexts for all kinds of reasons, and that some of the most successful organisations for women workers in free trade zones, in marginal barriers in home working have been independent women's organisations who have a whole range of relationships with the official trade union movement. And that, again, I think is an ongoing conversation in Ruskin and elsewhere in terms of what who's allowed to be the authentic voice of workers internationally. So again, a very current kind of theme from Swasti and Sheila's work.
And I'm sure you'll want to take up, some of those themes, particularly around home working, where Carol gives her presentation in a moment. But before we move on to that,
just a comment on home working. Many of you can think that home working was something related. Related to the old microphone, to the old type of economy. But nowadays, in a lot of cases in firms, we have people that decide to work from home, part-time or sharing the time. And this is not the, let's say, low segment of the labor market. These workers are clerks, are perhaps also important managers, women important managers. And I think two issues are coming. One, the social responsibility of firms. We have to push legislation toward the social responsibility because firms must adopt organization of work which is women-friendly. So, especially for women being at home with children, in Italy they are out of the labor market, typically. Women with more than 2 children resign. But we have to push this social responsibility. This could be also a kind of thing that is not just taken by trade unions, it's taken by in political science, because policy must also re-regulate the labor market. And secondly, I think that it's very important that we consider that institutions must involve the women condition, and we need to have institutions that are creating egalitarian conditions for men and women. Just a few weeks ago in Italy, it was proposed by the director of IMSS that we oblige Italian men to stay at home for 15 days when they are father. Because in Italy, which is a kind of a very traditional south of Italy country, the culture is very traditional, the responsibility for children is only on the head, on the shoulder of women. So we need also to force institutions. And this could be also an important, in my view, element of your activity. If I can give some suggestions in the Swasti memory.
I'm going to thank Sheila for the memories that she's shared with us, and Linda will be too. And before we move on to Carol, who I'm sure is going to talk particularly about homeworking and some of these issues we can discuss further, I'd just like to follow on from what's been said about how the inspiration I took from Swasti as somebody who was both an academic and an activist, and as something that I tried to exemplify in my own work, in the academy, in the UN, in the NGOs at the grassroots, and I think Swasti was a wonderful role model in that. So thank you, Sheila, for sharing your memories. I mean, we all, that book has pride of place. I've been actually throwing out books from my library in the university, my room in the university, because I had to close it down. I'm moving to another city. But all the ones that were Swasti, that were Sheila, that were Carol's, they've all been put in the box to transport to my new home. So this has been very inspirational. Carol, let me welcome Carol Volkowitz, to many of you for her work on homeworking at the University of Warwick, and now she's worked on a whole range of other things, but I think she's going to share with us in particular. And you need a PowerPoint.
No, it's on. It's on the background. It's only one towards the top. Swasti. Well, first of all, I have to say thank you very much for asking me to talk. I worked on homeworking in Bradford in the early 80s, and then in Coventry and nationally, and then in London. And I was a very active member of the National Homeworking Group at one time, and then it sort of fell away, as these things do. And I worked on something else, and then came back into it for reasons that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'll try and talk about it. But I've heard Swasti speak many times, and I've read her work, but I came to know her because we were, myself and she and Annie Fazakli, who was then at Warwick, and someone called Peter Tollardale, received money from the Tower Hamlets Cooperative Development Agency to do a feasibility study of a women's homeworking cooperative in Tower Hamlets. And Swasti was, as usual, incredibly busy, but she was willing to take some time to participate in this, and in particular to talk to what we were told were aspiring home-based workers in Tower Hamlets. And the outcome of this study was, I think, instructive. Swasti went ahead and organized a focus group, and the first thing she found out was that the women had no interest in working at home. They wanted to get out of it. And secondly, they did not want to be in the clothing trade because they saw that as quite low status. And she met a group of young women who had a I thought, a very good idea. They wanted to start a dry goods cooperative, retail and wholesale in the neighborhood, which would get them out of the home, but which would be within the respectable community. And so we featured this as our main recommendation to the agency, and they refused to pay us for about half of the work. And this, I mean, I think this is, I mean, it wasn't a great report, and I wasn't a great manager, but I think it still says something about the difficulty there is in, on one hand, working with other people and working with agencies, but also listening to women and trying to hear what they say as well. And I was just rereading Swasti's Gender and Digital Economy, and she talks a lot in the introduction to that about how important it is to ask women about their needs and priorities and not to assume that we know the answers. So I think that experience in Tower Hamlets really does confirm that. I thought that I would just talk a little bit, I would just talk a little bit about recent research on home-based work that I've been involved in. And because it does involve talking to women, but it does also involve some continuities, but it also suggests important changes, and I would really welcome anybody that could tell me what Swasti would think about this. The study was led by Frances Hollis, who's an architect at the House School of Architecture at London Met in London, and it was funded as part of a Connected Communities project, i.e. social cohesion, but funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, which got into quite a new field for them. And what this project attempted to do was to look at people living in social housing who wanted to work at home, and to look at the architectural and spatial difficulties which they were running into in these attempts. And so we worked with one of the social housing providers in East London, not far from Tower Hamlets actually, to try and meet with current and aspiring home-based workers and to see what kind of provision or help the Housing Association could provide. And it was quite interesting because social housing in London was built to discourage working at home. You probably noticed that flats were designed with no spare space because they didn't want industrial home working going on. They wanted the work to be for men outside the home. So it is actually quite difficult to make space for working at home in some older social housing. And I suppose the main thing I would say about our conclusions is that the main people that were interested in working at home at that time, in 1913, 14, is people who had been excluded from chains of commodity.